Dia, you record you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third Project Management Network Conference of 2022, following two successful ones earlier on in the year. So today's theme focuses on project management of sustainability programs across the public service. My name is Kevin Dowling. I'm currently head of ICT in the Department of Defence and Programme Director overseeing a series of enterprise application projects. I am the current chair of the Project Management Network Committee and wish to thank this hardworking multi-organisational committee for their continued passion to embed project and programme management across the public service. I'm really pleased that one of our active committee members is facilitating this morning's conference. Orla Conduit has extensive experience in the private sector prior to joining the civil service in a role as the Project Management Office in the Department of Justice, and has been there since 2020. And she's not stopping there. She's currently pursuing a Master's in Management for Sustainable Development within Dublin City University. So who better than to facilitate this morning's conference in the sustainability space and the project management space than Orla. So I'm going to hand straight over to Orla and thanking Orla again for acting as the facilitator for this morning's conference.
Thanks very much, Kevin. So it's an honour to be asked to host this session. Project management and sustainability are both subjects very close to my heart. And obviously sustainability and climate action are very hot topics at the moment, excuse the pun. Not least because of the energy crisis, which obviously brings the whole dependency on fossil fuels into even sharper focus. But under the government's climate action plan, we in the public sector are being urged to lead by example. So, you know, it's a critical topic, I think, for everybody on the call. So we have targets to meet by 2030, and these would include reducing the carbon output of the public sector by 51%. We've to improve our energy efficiency by 50% by 2030. That's against 2009 baselines. We're moving to 20% home and remote working, as evidenced by myself here today. And we also in the public sector have huge spending power. So they estimate that 14% of GDP across Europe is from the public purse. So, you know, it's very critical what we procure and how we go about doing that. It can have massive impact. So today we're going to look at the role of project management in this transition and hopefully give you some ideas and inspiration for your own areas of work. We have a jam-packed agenda. We've a really good mix of speakers. So we range from the SEAI, who obviously are core to the energy agenda across the board for the whole country, public and private sector. We have a mammoth scale programme that the Defence Forces are undertaking to address their carbon footprint. And then we've got two smaller scale examples of innovation projects that are making a tangible difference in their local areas. So I think we have something for everyone. We look forward to taking your questions. We'll do Q&A at the end of all the presentations. Obviously we have a few speakers, so if we do run over time, we'll continue the recording and finish up the Q&A after the hour, so you'll be able to access that on recording if you're not able to stay on. So do feel free to put your questions into the chat throughout, and we'll collate those and run through as many as we can at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Kevin Darmody, who is the PMO lead for the SEAI, and he's going to talk to you about their work scaling up to help the whole country really deliver on the climate action plan. So over to you, Kevin.
Good morning. Can everybody see my presentation? Is that okay, Orla?
Yep, can see you there. Thank you.
So we are Ireland's National Sustainable Energy Authority, and we're at the vanguard of the war on climate change. This is no exaggeration. Climate action must be a fundamental national priority. What's it going to take? Well, SEAI is a public sector body that responds to changing government priorities. The government's Climate Action Plan is a portfolio of over 250 initiatives, and SEAI is involved in over 75% of them. In addition to this, this year we must support the government's response to the current energy emergency. In the last 6 years, the SEAI budget has increased by 7-fold and the staff numbers have tripled. This exponential growth is set to continue. You can see on the graph on the left here the kind of initiatives that have to be done at household level, at the EV level, at non-domestic buildings, and at renewable technologies, and lots more. Since 2016, our PMO has trebled in size and now delivers a 6-fold increase in project capacity. This is our response to the level of digital change in SEAI. We provide a scalable support across a gambit of portfolio program projects. We need to be agile and proactive. We respond by adjusting and balancing our priorities. The use of flexible IT resource models allows us to expand and contract, and we strive to deliver high quality, on time, on requirements, and on budget. We do this by use of a governance framework for project management, and this includes charters for enterprise architecture, project boards, IT steering committee, and a change advisory board. At the management level, we take instruction from the IT steering committee and prioritization from the executive level team. The SEAI IT team consists of a mix of technical and non-technical project management, business analyst, enterprise architect, and quality assurance skilled resources. We ensure full business analysis is completed before project initiation at development or stage 3. The Enterprise Architecture Forum applies a holistic view of the technical landscape. The Enterprise Architecture Forum guides the choice of best solutions for a project. This means speed to market and a standardized approach to solutions. We add future proofing of the business solutions. Our MO has transformed in recent years to meet business demand and to anchor the anticipated benefits of the programs using project management processes. We adopt a project methodology tailored to PMI's PMBOK, and we have a tailored BA methodology from BA-BOK. An IT strategy standardizes our IT platforms and solutions to efficiently scale up and scale out as required by our business demand. Our core expertise here includes BA, PM, QA, and EAF, but our philosophy is to do it once and do it right. The enhanced services are delivered by appropriate solutions, standardized platform, an end-to-end quality focus, delivery efficiencies, speed of response, and value for money. This is a more complex slide, but there's a lot in this, and this is really the core of how we go about our end-to-end methodology. At the top here, we have gates, which are approval gates, and then we have stages, which are the defined type of work. So within the area here of stages 1 and 2 is our business analysis, and we've broken it up into 3 work packages. These work packages can be done internally or externally by whichever a partner we choose as most suitable, because we have to flex depending on the size and the priority of projects. Our business analysis will be done by a business analyst, but it will have a project manager overseeing it, and we'll also have a briefing workshop with our supplier, who we intend to eventually get to do the development. They may or may not be involved in the business analysis, but we have defined work packages where we do that definition down to a very detailed degree, and I'll be showing you that in the coming slides. We bring the project from cradle to grave, and we engage the business owners across their full portfolio. This is the a slide I use to explain to our business owners what is involved in the levels of business analysis. The scope, business and user requirements are the business responsibility with IT facilitation. That's this gray arrow here and the first two levels. The system requirements and specifications are an IT responsibility with facilitation by the business. The corporate knowledge retained by the business analysts and stakeholders is reused in later projects, especially where we're using internal SEAI staff. The business analysis is defined from the top down, and we've chosen Microsoft Azure DevOps to facilitate this definition. Everything in Azure DevOps is defined in a hierarchy. For example, the system, the release, the project, the epic, the feature, user story, and task to make up the entire SRS. What we do here is go through different levels of definition. So the first level is the value stream, which is a conceptual model, and we use a visual model called VVM, which I'm going to show you an example of. And the next level then is to do the logical, which is the business process mapping. Then we do an early SIPOC, which is the supplier input, process output, and customer definition. Then we do a deeper dive into that and do a lower level of the SIPOC and establish user requirements. And then in level 5, we do the system requirements. And that makes up the SRS. We can do that either using Azure DevOps, or as we have in the past, we've used Word as a documented using documented templates. This here is an artifact we have developed called Visual Value Management as a Hinge product. It gets early business buy-in by articulating the business needs and the priorities. This turns business demand into an agreed stage journey. The value management is a long-used engineering method. We've taken it a bit further through the use of visual aids. The work package 2 requires a business process map. Now, I don't expect you to be able to read this, but I'm sure you'll recognize business process maps. And the one thing I would recommend is that they're completed to a standard template. So they need to be checked by a central standard. The next thing we do in the work package 2 is an end-to-end journey map for each business with the recognition of each business process that it engages. Better still, like in this example, compare multiple journey maps against each other. So what we've got here is 5 different business journey maps and how they engage at different stages across the whole end-to-end process. Some stages are included and some stages are excluded by certain business areas. But the fact that they're mapped alongside each other demonstrates how common they are to each other. And this has brought great standardization to our grant systems in particular. The PMO has moved from being an influencer and a supplier of project management services to a strategic business partner. The key to our success factors are in our PMO are teamwork, innovation, and anticipation of business needs. But most of all, it's a desire to do something to combat climate change. Once in a while, it's okay to blow your own trumpet. This year, our PMO has been selected as a finalist for the PMO of the year, along with the ESB and HSE. The latter were the winners of the award. And this slide, we've been asked to put into every external presentation, just to remind everybody that where possible, try to use energy outside peak times and don't switch on your big machines between 5 and 7 p.m. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you've got some questions for me.
That's great, Kevin. Thank you very much. And as a PMO lead myself, it's great to see such structure and rigor applied around your project management office. We'll probably take the questions at the end, so I'm going to jump straight in and introduce you to Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Higgins, our third Kevin of the day. I'm not sure what the collective term is for Kevins, but and all suggestions welcome. And Kevin is a member of the Defence Forces Senior Energy Executive and a Senior Energy Officer within the Corps of Engineers. So he's going to talk us through their, I would say, massive scale programme addressing this issue. So over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Orla. Just wondering, can you see the presentation?
And indeed, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So thank you, Orla, and good morning still to everybody. My name is Kevin Higgins, and I'm going to talk on the energy management within the Defence Forces. So the scope of my presentation is fivefold. I'm going to talk quickly about our energy targets. I'm going to put those targets then into the context of the challenge that we face within the Defence Forces. I'll then do a little bit of a deeper dive into the energy management system that we employ in the Defence Forces, which is underpinned by ISO 50001. I'll then quickly talk about the engagement that we do, both nationally and internationally, and then finally some of the lessons identified since we've implemented this management system. So first, a word about CO2. I like this graph. It's 800,000 years old. And it depicts the CO2 levels, the atmospheric CO2 levels. What we can see there is it hasn't peaked above 300 parts per million, but since really the Industrial Revolution in about 1760, and when they first started to measure these, we can see the peak. So it's gone up now at the moment, I think around 420 parts per million. So if anything else, this graph shows you that we need to address climate change seriously. In terms of the energy related targets that we have, we, like everybody else, we need to achieve a 51% reduction in absolute greenhouse gas emissions on a baseline of 2016 and 2018. And secondly, we need to improve our performance by 50% based on a 2009 baseline. Today, I'm just going to talk about the first one. What we need to do is, this graph is produced by Professor Brian O'Gallagher, who's based in, professor in UCC in Cork in energy engineering and also down in Marai. And there are three strategies you can adopt to decarbonisation. The first on the left, all three graphs or approaches or strategies get to net zero by 2050. But you can do early action, linear or late action. The difference between the first on the left and the last on the right is that if you adopt the one on the right, it means that your cumulative emissions are double that of the early action pathway, leading to double the warming impact. So where possible, organizations should really adopt certainly the early action or perhaps the linear one. In the Defence Forces, we're going to adopt the linear one as far as 2030, and that means that we have to achieve a 7% cumulative reduction on our energy emissions based on January 2020 right up to January 2030. And what that means for us then, because we measure on a monthly basis, it's a cumulative reduction of 0.6% per month. So putting this challenge in context. So in essence, what we have in the Defence Forces is we have two areas or two consumers of energy. We've got our transportation and we've got our buildings. So in terms of our transportation, we've got three different vectors that we use. We use land, naval and aircraft. And on the other side, we have 17 military installations with over 500 buildings within those military installations, ranging from accommodation, offices, gymnasium, workshops. So very, very wide ranging. And in terms of the balance of our energy consumption between those two pillars, we consume about 58% of our greenhouse gas emissions on transport and about the remaining 42% on greenhouse gas emissions. And in terms of our buildings, what we're talking about there is the electrical demand within the buildings and also our requirement to heat the space and provide water. So in terms of our baseline for 2030, this is the split between the utilities is 42%, and the other major consumer is really the marine, which is 40%. And I'll highlight the marine and air of 9% for a particular reason as we move through this. We have predicted in the Defence Forces that we're going to achieve 29% of our target, which is, of course, is 51%. And the cost that we've estimated at this stage to achieve the 29% reduction is in the order of 105 million euros. So the transportation, the three pillars of transportation. In terms of the road, we forecast that we will achieve our 51% target, and that's going to cost in the order of 68 million. In terms of our air, we predict we will achieve 20% of the 51% target, and the marine, we will achieve 10% of the 51% target. That means we will have a deficit in the order of about 13.5 kilotons of CO2. And the main reason for that is that in order to remove marine gas oil or aviation fuel, it's not within our remit in order to get sustainable aviation fuel to be used or alternative types of fuel to power our ships. So we have to engage closely with SEAI. We're involved in a sustainable aviation fuel workshop, which is a group which is established in 2021. And the solutions to aviation and marine will be industry-led. In terms of our building, the significant energy users are both space and water heating. Within our Defence Forces are 17 installations. We have approximately 663 heating systems in the Defence Forces, and we're going to have to address 400 of those heating systems in order to meet our 2030 targets, primarily through the electrification of our heating systems with the introduction and installation of heat pumps, as well as the hydraulic systems optimization of our existing heating systems. We will then offset the increased electrical demand that these will put in by renewable energy sources that we're on systems that we're considering. The estimate is 35 million in order to achieve this. And as we say, we predict we will achieve the 51% target. So our RES contribution is primarily in RES-E electricity. And what we have here is we've installed to date 20 PV arrays in 13 locations. We have 2 megawatt peak installed, and our target is 7 megawatt peak by 2030. In addition to that, we have a pilot project for a wind turbine in Finnocamp in Donegal, and we're assessing that with the expectation that we'll install that in the very near future. In terms of RES heat, we've installed 35 heat pumps across the Defence Forces to date, and we've got another approximately 360 to 370 of those to install by the end of 2030. What we've also done is we've installed EV charging points. Our plan is for 5 installations within the Defence Forces. At the moment, we've installed 20 charging points in McKee Barracks, both for our military vehicles, but also for our staff, so they can use those if they choose to, if they commute to work in electric vehicles. And we've a pilot project for a battery energy storage system, which is in Gormanstown. Now, in terms of our energy management system that's in place, it has been in place for approximately 10 years at this stage. It is a process that continually improves energy performance, and it is underpinned by 50001, which is an internationally recognized framework for implementing energy management system. And that's based on the Deming cycle, which is Plan, Do, Check, Act. And we're very proud of the fact that we were the first military in the world to gain the ISO 50001 standard back in 2012, and that we have continually been accredited right up to last year. So basically, the Plan, Do, Check Act is supported by a number of activities that can be split between management and technical. And another way of demonstrating this is through this this flow chart. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just focus on 4 areas just to demonstrate how we comply with the leadership, the planning, the operation, and the performance and evaluation. So the planning aspect of the ISO 50001 is this. It's our Defence Forces Energy Register, a key enabling document to managing energy. And within that, it outlines the policy document, which is perhaps if you're using the PMBOK, it might be considered the project charter, or the PID if you're using Prince 2. It also outlines our objectives and targets, the control structures that we have within the Defence Forces, and then the duties and responsibilities, right from our energy champion right down to every single soldier in the organisation. And it outlines then about our energy plan, its operation, the training that we need to do for all our soldiers, and also the review mechanism that we need to put in place. While we also have produced checklists and templates for people who are on duty on a daily basis to check if they identify any areas of wastage of energy. So this is the energy policy. This is the charter itself. It's signed by our Chief of Staff, our SecGen, if you want to call him that, or the equivalent. And the bottom line is really important because he says that our commanders, which are our operational commanders that are in charge of our land fleet and our installations, that this policy must be communicated, that's his direction, and that resources must be made available at all levels for its successful implementation. We are at the moment updating this policy, and we expect to produce the latest one in early 2023. This is our energy structure. Right at the very top, we have our Deputy Chief of Staff, which is the second highest ranking officer in the Defence Forces. And within that, we have the Senior Energy Executive, which is really the driver. And that could be considered the green team at the very highest level of the Defence Forces. And within that, I suppose what you could call the climate and sustainability champion that we have, and I'm using that term because it's contained within the climate action plan, is our 2-star general on the left, Adrian Amuraku. And this senior energy executive, they meet, I sit on it, we meet every 2 months, and then we have our final energy management review where all the stakeholders come and they explain what projects they executed during the year, how much energy they saved, and what projects are they going to execute the following year. Within that, then, the workhorse, I would say, of this, the person that does the major lifting, I suppose, is Colonel Damien McAvoy, who's the Director of Engineering. He could be considered as the Energy Performance Officer, if you want to use, again, the terminology that the Climate Action Mandate puts in place. And he needs to maintain the top level commitment. He has to do the long-term planning for the energy management and develop the yearly action plans. Then cascading all the way down to the organisation within the energy register is the duties and responsibilities of, in this stage, our unit orderly sergeants. And each one of those fills out exactly what they should do. And I'll bring your attention to number 4, which is the opportunity register, which is very important. So if our people at the lowest level of our organisation identify opportunities for saving energy, then that opportunity is loaded up onto our energy saving. So the next part of that is where we talk about planning and collection of energy data. And this is the process that we follow. And there are 3 real pillars. To save energy, you need information, you need a lot of metrics, you need a lot of sensors in your buildings. You need to have the people that manage that and change their behavior. And finally, you need the technology like heat pumps, solar PVs. So this is the sort of data that we gather. We've been gathering it since 2009. It's our annualized energy consumption in all the different pillars where we use energy. And then on a weekly and monthly basis, all the energy we consume, the fuel we use to drive our vehicles is uploaded. And all that then is collated once a month and is presented in this type of a format where you have your 7% glide path, and then you chart where you are every single month, as you can see, from January 2020 right up to, at this stage, we're reporting on October. And you can see if to take corrective actions if you're going in the wrong direction. So in terms of design, the energy saving opportunity then will identify a project, for example, that needs to be actioned. We assess if there is merit in it. And in this one, it was a deep retrofit of our band hall where our band play. We inside MyCore, we model it using a dynamic thermal simulation. We look at the different elements whereby you can address, and then you decide, well, which is the most cost-effective one to get your largest uplift in terms of energy. So the existing building was a D1 rated. We look at 11 courses of action. We came up with a final one where we said, externally insulate the walls, put in a 30 kilowatt heat pump and also 12 kilowatt PV array, and we'll get that building from a D1 up to an A3, and we get an uplift of 416 kilowatt hours per meter square. So that's the type of analysis we do. Finally, the management review. It's done yearly. It summarizes, it looks back at the year. It identifies the energy projects that we had planned. Did we actually execute them? It looks forward to new targets and what are the resources that are required. And then it reviews the effectiveness of the system that we have in place. Our next one is on the 12th of December. In terms of engagement at a European level, we sit on each one of these three. In terms of this one, which is the Consultation Forum on Sustainable Energy in the Defence sector. There are 4 working groups. I sit on the first one, which is on the energy efficiency and building performance, and we share knowledge with our fellow militaries throughout Europe and learn from each other to see the best way of addressing our targets. Lessons identified. Energy management system, it's essential to achieving targets, but it's iterative in nature. It's a live document. I understand with the new climate action mandate that every large public sector body in the country must achieve ISO 50001, and that is mandated by government. Secondly, the importance of top level commitment. This is a 30-year project. We have a milestone in 10 years' time, but the project is in total 30 years. So you've got to have top level commitment in order to achieve our goal. You have to ring fence funding for energy projects. They're exceedingly expensive. You have to dedicate staff for energy management. Double jobbing won't do. And we can see SEAI have increased their, as was mentioned by Kevin, in terms of their staffing in order to tackle this project. We have to embed energy into the organizational culture. It is hard to inculcate, but we provide training right at the moment you enter our organization. We provide training on energy and the importance of saving energy. You've got to have the right expertise in terms of having carbon efficient design and optimal controls demonstrated by the Band Hall project. You've got to align clear targets with your action plans. And finally, accountability is essential at every single level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kevin. There's certainly a lot in that, and it gives us great confidence, the progress being made. So, and especially some of those lessons learned, I think will resonate very strongly with the audience. So much appreciated. Again, we'll leave the questions, the Q&A till the end. So I'm now going to introduce Niall Kane, who is joining us from Waterford City and County Council. He's got 24 years local authority experience, and he's currently employed as Senior Executive Engineer in the Environment section of Waterford City and County Council, responsible for waste, air and noise pollution. And he's going to talk us through an innovative waste management solution that they've implemented. So over to you, Niall.
Thank you, Orla. You can all see that, yeah?
And indeed.
Okay. See, the problem we had is that we have a network of bring banks around Waterford, but we get surges of use, especially around things like Christmas, communion times or anything like that. But the bring banks are emptied on a schedule. You know, we have no sight of what is in any of them. And if they're busier than expected, we end up with people putting stuff on the ground in front of them. It's because for health and safety reasons and just manpower, we can't go sort through that. So that's often sent to landfill. So it's wasteful. But we also have it in our collection contractor. They've no visibility on what's in the bring banks. So they come along on their schedule. They don't know if they're going to have an empty bin or a full bin or whatever to empty. So we're trying to avoid having unnecessary trips. So for the members of the public, what we look to do is provide a system that they can come along and look before they head out with our bottles, our jars, to recycle them to see is there space in the bring bank before they get there. And then if there's not, they can either choose to postpone the recycling or choose to go to a different site, and then try to reduce abortive car trips for them. What we did, Public Service Innovation Fund 2022, we applied for funding under that, and we were awarded 45,000 to install level sensors in our bring sites. So we advertised what we wanted on e-tenders. We had a company from Galway, Magnus Monitors, were a successful contractor. And what they did is they installed a radar sensor to each of our bins, key bins at each site. We didn't have enough money to put them on every bin, so we had to pick bins that would be like the canary in the coal mine, that would give us a good indication. The sensor has a long battery life, and it communicates over mobile to provide near real time back to our server. And we go with near real time because there's a trade-off between battery life and how often it updated. So we're looking at updates every 3 or 4 hours. So that'll give us hopefully a battery life between 5 and 8 years. So this is a portal that we'll show for the contractor. You can see as a bring bank fills up, you can see the level getting higher, and then they can schedule that for emptying. So it does allow them to plan their journeys and avoid the bring banks that aren't quite full yet. Especially for remote ones, like ones that are out in the smaller towns and villages, they don't want to make unnecessary trips there if they can avoid it. So we then have a public map which we're sharing for the general population to have a look at, so they can basically see where the nearest bring bank is. They can have a look at if it's green, it's good, there's space there. If it's orange, there's limited space. We're not saying that it's full, but it's, if they're thinking, a day or two it mightn't be there, and red, at least one of the colours are full. We basically took an opinion that if one colour was full, it was not like, clear green or brown. There was no point sending people there, because for that colour glass, what are they going to do? So I'll just show you the live one here. Give me 1 second now here. Share that as well now. So this is basically our map. We can, it displays on phone or whatever. You can come along and look. You can see that's my closest one there in my local Tesco's. So there's space in each one there. But if it was full, there was a different one which was full. You can see some are orange or red. They're waiting to be collected. But I was going to one that I didn't know, or if it was a tourist that didn't know where it was, I could actually just click the arrow at the side and it'll open up Google Maps to give me directions. So it's in that sense, it's trying to be as convenient as possible. Go back to my presentation there. So we launched last week for the public, so we issued a press release there, and then we were featured on the local radio station. I had to do an interview for a news broadcast because the whole point is trying to get this out to the public. We are having a competition running all this week on the local radio, where we're actually giving away prizes, because Waterford has such a long association with glass and craftsmen working with glass. We've got a couple of local craftsmen to actually make prizes out of recycled bottles or out of old beer bottles or wine bottles. So we're going to give those away as prizes. So we're going to run a radio competition this week, and then next week there's a social media competition to try and just trying to get the information out. The other thing we're doing is putting stickers on bring banks so people can find it. Just a QR code if they do happen to turn up at a bring bank and it's full, they can come along and have a look at it. That's actually, there's a typo in that. That was an early draft of it, but that's our plan, to get that information out to people. And then we just do the usual social media campaign to try to get the information out, because we find that's a good way of getting information to people nowadays. And then we have try keep putting fresh information out. We created a number of different small mini facts or whatever that we can just try and use to build our social media campaign around. I suppose this is for our lessons learned. I'm not a project manager, so I suppose I'm probably speaking to a choir here now, but you know, you got to start early because things do take longer than you expect. You know, things are just seem to be set up to delay you no matter what you're trying to do. There's always something's going to go along. You know, get your input from your fellow stakeholders as early as possible because, you know, you come along and say, well, that's not going to take too long, but you don't know what else they have on. Like, you know, just as something as simple as that sticker for the sign. You know, when I look to get an Irish translation on it, our Irish officer was saying, well, I've a backlog here of a couple of weeks, you know, I'm not going to get to it. You know, so things like that can delay you. So it's important that you just you gear all these things up early, identify where those critical points are, and you know, flag them up so they can be in the queue early on. You know. Okay, that's it. And if you want to come down and try our bottle banks, you can always come down and visit beautiful Waterford and go along on the Greenway there. So, and after you have a few drinks, just make sure you check our ring banks and recycle properly. Thank you.
That's great, Niall, and I think it's something we can all clearly identify with. We've all probably arrived at a full bottle bank at some point in our lives, and I'd say there's definitely other local authority stakeholders on the call. You'll probably be getting inundated with queries now. I think it's something that definitely sounds like it should be rolled out much more broadly. And I think you may not be a project manager, but you've identified good lessons learned there and probably fell foul of the same optimism bias that we can all fall foul of occasionally. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so next up we have Shane McMonigal from Donegal County Council, and he's a Senior Executive Engineer in the Water and Environment Directive of Donegal County Council, leading the OPW-funded Flood Relief Scheme Unit. And he's going to bring us through their innovative invasive species management project. So over to you, Shane.
Okay, thanks very much, Orla. Bring it up here. Right. Yeah, look, I was a project manager in a past life in a consultancy and all those. I heard Prince 2 referenced in all the stages and all that. It's all speaks volumes to me, but this was a little breakaway in some ways. It was the Public Service Innovation Fund that we went for last year, and it was for a project that we developed the acronym NOT, which is knotweed novel organic treatment, and it was looking at an alternative way to treat knotweed, and all the partners are shown there just below. So just a quick contents, just some background on the project. Why we came to bring it forward, some project details, the main goals, some photographs because it's obviously novel and new, so just to bring you through what we were doing, and just some lessons learned. Japanese knotweed, it's an invasive alien species which is extremely widespread throughout Ireland. Most people on the call will have heard of it in some ways. If you're in the public sector in Ireland and you're looking to deliver a capital project or even maintenance and operations, you'll have come across it, and it often is certainly the fly in the ointment when you actually get to site and look to deliver something if you haven't identified it in advance. It's listed in the third schedule of the European Community's Birds and Natural Habitats Regulations 2011. And essentially its listing there means that it's an offence to spread it. And that means that managing it on site, needs to be very strictly monitored and strictly set out in a plan in advance. So it's basically a very costly thing to manage. In terms of mitigation or advanced treatment, it's typically treated using glyphosate, and glyphosate is the key ingredient in Roundup, and obviously other products available, but that'll be the one that'll be familiar to most. But it's also very resilient. I suppose not quite resistant, but it is very resilient to treatment with glyphosate because it's got this rhizome root system. And a rhizome root is basically like a ginger. If you've ever bought a bit of ginger in the shop, but that is a rhizome root. So essentially, when you're treating with glyphosate at surface level and attacking the green above the ground, you've got this root system underneath the ground, which is quite extensive. And can store energy year to year, and so even when you think you've gotten top of it, maybe after 3 or 4 years of treatment, it can come back. And there's a school of thought that can be up to 20 years later. So yeah, it's quite pervasive and tricky to treat. And what this grew out of, I suppose, is Donegal County Council funded a pilot study by the Inishowen Rivers Trust, which are a community group based in Inishowen, looking at organic compost as a treatment in 2021, and that was as an alternative to glyphosate. And the whole, I suppose, premise of the organic compost treatment was that the compost would effectively condition the soil and alter the makeup of bacteria and fungus, nematodes and protozoa to make it less favourable for knotweed essentially, and more favourable for native vegetation. So yeah, building on that 2021 project success, we decided to put in for a Public Service Innovation Fund. It was a partnership submission, so it was Donegal County Council, the Inishowen Rivers Trust, which are a community group, LawPro, which is the local authority's water programme, the Office of Public Works, who, as mentioned in my introduction there, they fund our section that I'm a part of. So it was with their blessing that we brought it forward. And KPM Soils, which is a very small consultancy based in Inishowen, and effectively set up new to look at this year, and that's led by another Kevin Moore, who is a student of the Soil Food Web School, which looks at this kind of soil conditioning with compost. So he was really the brains of the operation. There was a 57k total budget, 47k of that was PSIF, and 5k each from Donegal County Council and LawPro as match funders. And I suppose the main goal was to scale up on last year. And on the right hand side there, you have an image of last year's treatment site taken earlier this year. And it was to scale up that compost production using a windrow turner. And a windrow turner will not be familiar to most people, but it's a tractor drawn implement. Well, they can be standalone, and the likes of Bord na Móna have a windrow turner that would drive over the top of a car, so it would sit clean over the top of a car. But the idea of them is that they can be pulled over what's called a windrow, which is just a mound of compost in a long line, and it'll turn it strategically. So we had hoped to either procure an agricultural implement. I don't know if many people are familiar with them. Certainly those from an agricultural background will be a conditioner mower type implement, and modify it so it could be used as a windrow turner, or else buy one direct. But at the start of the year, I suppose 2022, we were just coming out of the lockdowns. Labour and special skills were in demand. Steel was also very expensive because of what was happening worldwide. And also one of the big places that uses windrow turners due to the agricultural background is Ukraine. And obviously we don't need to dwell too long on what's happening there. That made it very tricky to get anything out of there. So that was the hope. It didn't materialise, but we'll discuss further what did happen. The other main aim was to further knowledge on a new field of science via experimental findings. So identifying the science, analysing the soil in advance and then analysing it after treatment, and develop a sustainable and more successful method of treatment. Like I said, on the right there, you can see where the kind of almost like wood chipping is to the front. That's where the knotweed was last year that was treated. And the rear is the control site that wasn't treated. So the difference is quite stark. And we've been treating in the flood relief scheme unit to mitigate risk during capital development projects for 3 or 4 years, and we haven't seen anything like those results. So that was one of the main drivers. So just a bit on the compost production. Centre there is yet another Kevin Moore, who's a scientist, and he's there happily mixing essentially like a cake, buckets of wood chippings, grass cuttings, seaweed. They looked at different manures, cow manure, chicken manure, horse manure, which one would work best. They have to blend up crab shells to look at the nitrogen content. So he's doing all that there and mixing it. On the right hand side in cages, or on the left hand side with a cement mixer, which was our alternative to the windrow turner. So you can see there just to the on the front of the cement mixer on the left hand side, you can see much smaller windrows, and that's what's meant by a windrow where it was turned. So that's the production, analysis, and the monitoring. You can see him there in the center with his very long thermometer checking temperatures on the compost, which is key. So it's very strategic. You need to get it over 70 degrees, I think, and monitor it, not let it get too hot. On the center was the microscope. One of the procurement challenges came in from America. Not a very standard piece of equipment for someone in flooding or flood engineering, so that was a bit of a challenge. On the right hand side is how this is applied. So it's just mulch basically around the base of the plant. So you're talking about an inch or half an inch of compost around the base to alter the soil, And on the left-hand side, you can see him spraying on a leachate generated from that mulch. So he has basically like a big tea bag that the mulch is filled into and put into a tank of water, and that generates a leachate, which is also sprayed onto the leaves to I suppose, encourage fungal growth in the leaves and attack the plant. Here's just a quick before and after. On the left-hand side is before, on the right-hand side is after. This will need to be monitored. You know, the project only lasts a year. Knotweed grows for many years, so you know, to be monitored into next year, further cycle of the project. But initial results quite good. And just to close on the lessons learned, the main goals were scaling up. As I mentioned, it was a partial success due to improvisation. So they bought the cement mixer with the funding, and I suppose that made a success out of what it could have been a bit of an issue, and left them to scale up. Glyphosate-based treatment, which is the Roundup-based treatment, may also be maybe counterproductive. So, unfortunately for us, in the flood relief scheme unit, we've been treating for 4 years. But I suppose the hypothesis of their study, or the findings of their study, is even though you'll effectively eventually kill the knotweed with glyphosate, you'll leave a biological wasteland. And because knotweed's a frontier plant and thrives where nothing else does, the most likely plant to recolonize unless you take fairly strong action or intervention is probably knotweed. Treatment was successfully changed the soil makeup. So one of the key things was to change that bacterial dominated to a fungal dominated, and you know that seems to be the case. We'll need to monitor that into next year. Procurement presented some challenges in terms of OGP guidelines. Obviously, there's fairly significant inflation at the moment that we haven't really had over the last decade. We've seen that with suppliers apologising to us that costs have gone up 30% just between supply orders and things like that. So it was challenging. And also the non-standard nature of what we were doing, say microscopes outside of my field of expertise, trying to procure those, and the importance of spec is very important. Brexit also presented issues. The UK supplied us with a lot of high sensing, high technological equipment, and buying in from them is no longer as easy. Global supply chain issues, mentioned steel, buying in from Ukraine, things like that. But I suppose one of the successes was the blend of public bodies and community group working very well together. Establish that network, trust. The Initial Rivers Trust are also involved in natural water retention measures and catchments. So, we've built that network there now to hopefully see that we can be trusted to work together with them, and that hopefully can be of mutual benefit in the future. And just our close on the thanks with the project team there in full, with Kevin in the middle, and Chris from the Public Service Innovation Fund, Trish from the Initial Rivers Trust, and John from the Initial Rivers Trust, Jimmy from LawPro, and myself on the right. So, look, great project to work on, and thanks very much for listening.
That's great, Shane. Thank you so much for that. It's always good to hear of natural solutions to these very, very tricky problems. So I'm sure as well that if there's anyone from other local authorities, they'll be keen to reach out to you to understand more about this and see if they can apply it in their areas. Okay, so we are at 12:23. So we're going to do some Q&A. I've been monitoring the questions coming in. So let me see now where we'll start. I think we might go back to Kevin Darmody and to go in the running order that we had. So Shane, no, it wasn't Shane Hogan, sorry, that was somebody else. That's that one. Well, we go with Shane Hogan's question. Shane was asking if you do any assessment of the carbon impacts of ICT implementations as part of your project methodology.
No, I don't actually. But I'll certainly take it into consideration. I don't have anything further to answer on that one, I'm afraid.
No, that's perfect.
Catherine Lynch asked the first question, which was, what's the typical time to market with a project following the methodology you outlined? I'm afraid, Catherine, it's like a piece of string. I could say it's 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, etc. But it all depends on the size of the project, the nature of the people who are asking for it, the nature of the information they have in the first place. Now, the example I gave there was called RES, a Renewable Energy Sustainable Scheme, and it was a case where we hadn't got a program like that before. It was it was a greenfield site, and the business person came to me and said, "I know exactly what to do, have it all in my head, but unfortunately, the person didn't have it all in their head, and it became quite a lot more complicated. But it was correctly more complicated because we want to find out as early as possible what's involved, not halfway through the analysis or even further down in during or after development. So the visual value management was a really great success there because we were able to establish what the scope of the project was, what the priorities were, and what was best to do in what order. So initially we had a 3-phase project. We've closed it into a 2-phase project. Phase 1 is in user acceptance testing at the moment and is looking very well. It'll be implemented in January, and phase 2 is in midway through business analysis now. And we're very satisfied with the methodology in that particular example. But as any project manager here knows, every project is a different animal. But if you can get them into the process and make them follow the process, it actually works. Once you go outside that process, then things start getting pear-shaped. Hope that answers your question, Catherine.
So, Kevin, that leads me on to another. You probably already answered this from your perspective around how important is project and program management to the success of this. I can see that clearly from a PMO perspective, that's very strong on your side. So I might direct that maybe at one of the others, possibly Kevin Higgins, if you want to come in here on the importance of project and program management in your space.
Yeah, absolutely. In relation to meeting this particular target, which are 2030 deliverables, it's absolutely essential. If you don't have a recognized system in place that you follow, which set out the individual activities, your milestones, then it's very hard to manage, particularly a complex project like this. And I suppose this is reinforced then in terms of the climate action mandate that was published on the 4th of July of this year by the government, and the subsequent roadmap that outlines that. It states within that you must have a recognized energy management system in place, all public sector bodies, all large ones, and feeding onto a question there is that all large public sector bodies must have an energy management system, perhaps underpinned by ISO 50001, or perhaps under the ISO 14001. So that means that any large public sector body, and they describe what that is all government departments, all public sectors that have an annual energy consumption of greater than 50 gigawatt hours. The Army or the Defence Forces has about 200, or any homogenous sectors like education or health. They have to put in place ISO 50001 by way of an example, which underpins the importance of project management or program management.
Great. Yeah, so I see you've addressed the question that came in. And I think probably we'll direct people towards the public sector climate mandate document. We can send out the link with the materials from this meeting. So I suppose that's a first point of call for anyone who's not sure what it is they should be doing. And the other thing that you mentioned, Kevin Higgins, was the fact that double jobbing doesn't work. And I was just interested to know how many people are dedicated to the energy management in the Defence Forces now. Do you have enough?
Yeah, very good question. I suppose our journey started in 2007, actually, in the Defence Forces, when we created a brand new appointment, which is the Defence Forces Energy Manager, and that was of the rank of captain. A lot of things have changed since 2007. I mean, it's 15 years ago, and we have more challenging and stretching targets. So at the moment, to answer your question, we have a singular individual who's in charge of it. Sorry, who's involved in it solely without doing anything else. There are many other people who are passionate about it, including myself, but do we need to really revisit that and see, do we need more dedicated staff? Perhaps we do. I think when we look at developing our roadmap, which all public sector bodies must do so, the climate action roadmap by Q1 of next year, I think when you do a deep dive analysis and understand the depth and magnitude of this task, I think there will be a requirement certainly to appoint many more, in my view, dedicated personnel to that. But at the moment, we have one appointment for it.
Okay, interesting for the scale of what you're doing. And I noted as well that you do emphasize that senior sponsorship is absolutely critical, that it needs to be at the top level within the organization.
Absolutely. And what I think is very good, again, in this climate action mandate and the roadmap, is that there's going to be a commonality of, we'll say, a common lexicon of terms. And they've termed, we have the DCOS support, Major General O'Morricu, who is our in charge of our senior energy executive. But now what they're terming it is the climate and sustainability champion. And there's going to be one in each public sector body. And I think that's really important, because when you're meeting at meetings then and you introduce yourself, immediately you know the actual role, duties and responsibilities. So, so having that buy-in at the very top is essential.
Great, thank you. Niall, I might come to you now. And I was just wondering, well, something that I'm always very interested in is how we track the benefits of projects after we've delivered them. So I know you've only just rolled out your banks, but how do you intend to monitor the success of this project?
And I suppose from our dashboard, we'll be able to look at and check on our compliance of our collector. You know, we can see when it's full and how quickly he responds to that. So when we see long periods where the banks are full, we'll be able to come along and follow up on that, because he's not meeting the service level agreement with us. You know, it's much more difficult to say how many trips people have avoided. You know, people sometimes they'll share trips, they'll drop it off, you know, glass while they go into the supermarket, and they might have been going there anyway. So it's much more difficult to measure that. So we haven't really any plans to try and do anything other than that, other than looking at the number of people who use it and try and use that as a benchmark. But you know, I think that's as much as we can hope to do.
I suppose the visible overflow or lack of it will be should be obvious enough anyway. And have you had interest from other local authorities? Have you been speaking to others about getting this?
Well, it's only been launched now this week, so it's sort of it's I suppose it's early days yet to see what other people are saying. Like, I've showed it to one or two, all right, in the neighbouring local authorities to see what they think about it, you know. But it's you know, I'm sure they're going to be looking at how much it's going to cost as well. Like, you know, it's the great thing about the public sector innovation fund is that it gave us enough money to basically to cover all our bottle banks. You know, you know, by having them all covered, it provided a benefit. If you only had one or two of them, the same benefit isn't there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Shane, we've a question in for you. You're being asked if you can elaborate on the challenges of the OGP guidelines, and in particular, how did you manage to balance the requirements of the Public Service Innovation Fund with the OGP guidelines?
Yeah, I mean, the guidelines, I suppose it's twofold. There's obviously given thresholds there for procurement, and it was just a purely an inflation related one is the first and the simplest one, in that I think the product I mentioned was like, it's a coconut husk based matting which retains material on the ground, so it basically binds to the ground. And the supplier of that was in Northern Ireland. They had quoted us €160 per sheet of this thing, and he'd one of those left in the yard. When he got his supply in from England, it had gone to 220. So just based on the thresholds, you know, you've got a lot less buying power now. Based, you know, and I suppose for a long time, really, since the end of the last crash, we held fairly steady for quite a long time, and you were getting relatively speaking the fairly good purchase for what you had. That's changing fairly rapidly now. That's one challenge. The other one was the experimental nature of this. So we were working with the Initial Rivers Trust and KPM Soils, and they had quite specific products or items in mind that suited their experiment. Now, if they went, example is if they went above the €1,000 threshold and they were in that 1,000 to 5,000 category, we needed the 3 documented, 3 written quotes. And oftentimes they would come and say, well, I don't want any of those other ones. I want this one because that's what will work for this experiment. And I suppose it's getting across to them and working with them to work through look, we need 3 quotes. So your specification needs to nail on what you need here. So it's not just enough to say verbally that you need it. I need a specification that I can go out and drive the purchase of this microscope, being one of the examples. And in terms of compliance with that, then with the Public Service Innovation Fund, for local authority, it's the exact same. So it was no different in terms of compliance and with the requirements of PSIF. It's just that the things that I suppose I was procuring were a lot more unusual. So, in local authorities and road sections, say if you wanted some aggregate, you can go to the British Standard, define the aggregate quantities you want, and you go out to a quarry and they'll tell you, yeah, look, we'll give you this much for that much. If you wanted coconut husk-based matting, versus the strength of that compared to hemp-based matting, it's not as common, and I suppose that's where it just pushed a little bit outside of my typical day-to-day. So that was more the challenge rather than any specific thing about the PSIF fund guidelines. They're pretty much the same as local authority. So
Okay,
yeah.
Great, thanks very much. I think it does. Just while we're on the topic of OGP, for the audience, you may be aware that the OGP have recently launched their Green Public Procurement web tool. So if anyone hasn't seen that, I'd urge you to go have a look at that. It's a very handy way to get criteria to include into your RFTs. So I'd urge people to go look at that. We might send out a link after the call as well. So we are gone over time. I have another few questions. So if everybody's okay to stay on for another 5 minutes or so, we might just keep going. And obviously it's being recorded. So if people in the audience need to drop that, they can pick up the recording after. So this is a great question. And I think this is to Kevin Darmody. You mentioned the move from PMO influencer to supplier. Have you any indication of the timeline for this PMO maturity?
Well, in our particular case, it really happened over a 6-year period, with, I would say, the last 3 to 4 years being the bigger part. It was a bit organic. We had to do it as opposed to planned to do it. And I think I said from influencer to partner, actually, as opposed to supplier, because we are much more in partnership with the business now than in the past, where we would have been seen as a supplier. Yes, we do have to influence things, but we've got skin in the game, if you like, now. So if you're going from the very beginning, you really have to have a strong determination and backing to get it done. And you certainly could get it done within a couple of years, depending on the size of the organization and the backing you'd have and the resources available.
Great, thank you. Kevin Higgins. So somebody's noting here the impressive mechanism of engagement from Brig Gen down through the hierarchy. So how do you ensure such a cohort of 9,000 persons are engaged as stakeholders?
Yeah, great question, and it's quite difficult and challenging. The mechanism we believe is the most successful is through education. So when you join the organization and you go into your recruit training or as a cadet, there is a module in terms of energy management. And then what we do is we do a more deeper and more informative module when you go into the logistical side of our organization. And it's at that level that we give people the tools and the techniques really to manage energy. The second way, so the first is through education. The second is through accountability. It is really important that the officers commanding units are held accountable for their energy consumption. and they then become the drivers in terms of ensuring individuals within their organization are keep at every stage of what they do energy to the forefront. So when they're planning exercises or operations, it's a factor among many other that they consider. But it is, because we have such a rotation of staff, it is quite challenging to continually keep that messaging going. But we have energy awareness days. On our PCs, we have pop-up windows that encourage and advise people. We have poster campaigns. So it's a continual process. And as well, we're considering also, we had it in waste management previously, we're considering it now in energy in terms of prizes. Particularly in the Army, we're very competitive. So if there's a prize to be won, people tend to engage fully into it. So that's another mechanism that we're looking at the moment.
That's great. I think prizes, I think that'll travel well outside the Defence Forces as well in terms of incentive for most people. So I think we've probably done most of the questions. I did have one last question. And obviously we've talked a lot about metrics and measurements, and I think Kevin Higgins in particular, you were talking about the expected impact of some of the initiatives that you have and how you envisage they're going to help you achieve those targets. So does that sort of measurement principles, do they come from the ISO standard, or are there any tools or guides that you recommend to anybody who's looking to maybe assess the potential impact of a project they might be working on?
Yeah, so the ISO standard does require you to validate what you predict is going to be the energy savings. So that is a part of our mechanism. We're very fortunate in terms of the work that the SEAI are doing, and they're a fabulous organization. And they, first of all, a number of years ago, developed a decarbonisation tool. They have now produced a gap to target tool, which is really useful. And that will predict the potential carbon savings on any particular project you're doing, and whether that helps you to get below your 7% glide path. But what we do in some of our projects, for example, our photovoltaic solar PV projects, it's a part of that we put in a performance that the contractor has to achieve. And of course, we measure that then. It's a little bit more difficult in terms of electrifying our heating system, because what you need to have there is you need to have a baseline within each building of how much energy you're consuming in that building. And then when you put in a new initiative, you need to, once that's done, you need then to measure that. And then that is your gap or your savings. So we're very much embracing what we call IoTs, Internet of Things, which are monitoring right down to the lowest level in each particular building, the electrical energy going into the building, the flow and return rates on our central heating systems. And that is one of the three pillars of actually energy management, which is the data, gathering the data first. And we haven't done it in all our buildings, but we're doing it in our significant energy user buildings. So yes, that's how we do it.
Great. And obviously that, I suppose that's not dissimilar then from Niall's work in Waterford, is very dependent on sensors and IoT and that type of technology. So it's understanding our data and then being able to feed that into modelling and calculations. I think that, if I'm not mistaken, I think we have probably covered most of the questions that came in, unless somebody else spotted something come in that I didn't. So I think with that, we may just look to wrap up. I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our presenters. I think that's been some fabulous information. And I know we did have some commentary in that people are very heartened to see the progress being made and the work being undertaken. And it gives us indeed hope that we will be able to achieve the targets that are set out for us. Thanks again to the team who organised this, to Kevin Dowling and to Jade O'Toole for pulling all of this together. To the network in general, we're always on the search for presenters or topics. So if anyone has any suggestions, recommendations, or just wants to get involved, you can contact the PM Network at the Reform Office at per.gov.ie. the session is recorded, so that will be posted online and shared with the PM network. I think we'll be able to share the presentations potentially as well. And then there's probably some links that we may have alluded to throughout the session. So we'll share those subsequently as well. So thank you very much, everybody. And we'll see you next time.